Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to today's Explainer, where we're unpacking a really fascinating and honestly highly charged piece of viral source material. We're looking at something that perfectly captures the modern collision of intense political and religious rhetoric. Specifically, we'll be breaking down a fiery sermon delivered by Pastor Greg Locke and analyzing how that exact message was amplified by a YouTube commentator known as A Righteous Perspective. Now, our objective today is pure structured analysis. We're not taking sides here, but rather taking an objective look at exactly how this specific fusion of faith and politics is constructed, packaged, and delivered to a deeply engaged audience. So, let's get into it.
To help us digest all of this, here is our roadmap. We'll start with the viral sermon's premise, then Pastor Locke's ultimatum, followed by preparing for conflict. After that, we'll examine the commentator's endorsement, and finally, we'll break down the call to action.
Section 1. The viral sermon's premise.
So the core claim here is totally uncompromising. The pastor argues that political affiliation and Christian faith are completely mutually exclusive. What we're analyzing is a foundational argument that literally leaves zero room for any gray area. It's a strict binary setup. He's essentially forcing the congregation to view their civic and political choices through a very rigid theological lens. Let's look at exactly how he presented this to his audience.
Now, what's really interesting here is the aggressive phrasing the speaker uses to set a definitive boundary for his followers. He says, "You cannot be a Christian and vote Democrat in this nation. They are God-denying demons that butcher babies and hate this nation." By fusing the everyday political act of voting with highly charged religious descriptors like demons, the pastor is drawing an absolute moral line in the sand. He explicitly states that he doesn't care if this makes his audience mad, which signals that his priority is ideological purity over universal appeal.
Section 2. Pastor Locke's ultimatum.
The direct result of this premise is the excommunication of political dissenters right out of the physical church congregation. The speaker is arguing for strict church discipline. He's demanding that anyone who votes for the opposing political party must pack up and physically leave his church. It's an ideological purity test enforced through the immediate threat of social and spiritual exile from their community.
Listen to the exact words he uses to establish this pitch. "If you vote Democrat, I don't even want you around this church. You can get out, you baby-butchering election thief." Maintaining an analytical distance here allows us to see exactly how this rhetoric functions. The goal isn't to persuade the other side, right? The goal is to galvanize the people who stay by actively purging anyone who disagrees, ultimately creating a unified, singular echo chamber within the building.
So who exactly is he targeting? Breaking down the specific figures, we see a wide range of institutional targets. He calls out President Joe Biden, referring to him as a sleepy old fool, and claims former President Barack Obama is behind all of it. He targets media organizations, saying CNN can eat my dirty sock, and heavily criticizes the broader news media for their narrative regarding the manifesto of the Buffalo shooter, actually claiming the shooter was a communist. He even announces a highly specific plan to go to the Supreme Court on a Tuesday at noon to, quote, raise hell. It's just a sweeping indictment of his political and cultural opponents.
Section 3. Preparing for conflict.
Here, the sermon pivots to warnings of imminent societal collapse. He says, "Let me tell you something, you ain't seen an insurrection yet? You keep on pushing our buttons, you low-down sorry compromisers, you God-hating communist America." This explosive quote really illustrates the pastor's claim that a defiant, forceful pushback is coming. Notice the phrasing, "You keep on pushing our buttons." This rhetorically frames his congregation not as the initial aggressors, but as a righteous, persecuted group who are being pushed to their absolute limits, conceptually justifying a really intense future reaction.
To handle this perceived upcoming conflict, the pastor systematically lists out practical steps for creating what he calls a huge, protective biblical bubble. It's essentially a self-sustaining refuge for his followers. He claims God will provide daily bread for the congregation while the communists starve. The church plans to clothe and house people, literally turning their tent into a sleeping shelter stacked to the rafters with supplies. And they plan to erect a giant blue cross so it can be seen in the middle of the night as a beacon. It's a pretty stark example of how apocalyptic rhetoric translates into on-the-ground defense planning.
Section 4. The commentator's endorsement. Now we shift gears to the digital world. The YouTube commentator from A Righteous Perspective makes his stance immediately clear, stating, "I'm with him 100%. It's very difficult to be a Democrat and a Christian. They're antithetical to each other."
He completely validates the pastor's premise, serving to reinforce the message to his online viewers. By using the word antithetical, the commentator adopts the exact same mutually exclusive framework, acting as a digital megaphone that legitimizes the original sermon for the internet age.
And this brilliantly illustrates the stark, binary choice the commentator presents regarding modern Christian identity. You're either a lukewarm Christian, compromising just to appease the left, or you're an informed Christian who is passionate, willing to stand on the Word of God, and willing to give up their life for it. By framing it this way, he intellectually traps the viewer. You are forced to align with his intense political stance or admit to being compromised in your faith.
To explain why these informed Christians might face pushback, the commentator relies on a very specific definition. He cites rule number 5 from Saul Alinsky's famous book Rules for Radicals: ridicule is man's most potent weapon. He references this as a deliberate tactic used by the political left to silence opposition, discredit them, and make them feel bad. Grounding the viewer in this analytical framework is his way of providing a tactical explanation for the culture war he perceives they are fighting.
Section 5. The Call to Action.
What it all boils down to is this massive ideological ultimatum. The commentator summarizes his claim by stating that viewers are being forced to make an absolute decision in this perceived cultural battle. It's presented not as a spectrum of political choices, but as a stark cosmic battle between standing in the light versus standing in the darkness.
He lays out the ultimatum bluntly. You have to make a decision. You're either standing with the light or you're standing with darkness. Simple as that. You're being forced to make a decision. This perfectly showcases how the online media commentator directly echoes the pastor's original all-or-nothing framing from the very beginning of the source material. Both the physical pulpit and the digital channel use the exact same structural tactic to demand total allegiance.
So what does this all mean? Well, it leads us to conclude this explainer with a provocative question to leave you with. As digital media increasingly amplifies uncompromising religious and political rhetoric, how will this fusion shape the future of American civic discourse? We've seen today how localized, highly charged rhetoric is validated and broadcast to the masses, demanding absolute conformity. What you should take away from this is a much clearer understanding of the actual mechanics of this messaging. Thank you for joining me on today's explainer. Keep analyzing the media around you, and I'll see you next time.